Hello, aspiring no-code developer. All right, we have covered all of the foundational learnings to get to this application programming interface, this API portion. What the fetch is an API, man? If you've spoken with developers or if you've been in the space, then almost everyone talks about APIs. Almost everybody. Like you will always be interacting with this API, this application programming interface. And well, I want to tell you why that is, right? So why do these APIs exist? What are they? And well, how do you interact with them? And then potentially we might look into how we build one. Not in this video for sure, but we will definitely look at why, we will learn what they're built of, and how you can interact with other APIs. Because that is step one. Step two of that, the next level, if you want to level up, power up, would be building your own APIs for your own application. Because depending on how deeply you want to go into it, if you're building your own SaaS, you'll definitely need to create your own APIs. And knowing how to do that is going to be important. Step one to that, though, is knowing how to, I'll use the word consume or use existing APIs from other softwares. So, why do APIs exist? So that computers can talk to each other. I spoke about this in the previous video, but there's this premise, like computers, when computers were being created, they needed a way to talk with each other. And, JSON is the language of how they communicate to each other. APIs are the medium, right? The medium of how they communicate with each other. And that is just, this is just how APIs work. APIs are the interface through which applications, communicate with each other. Specifically, generally, this is used across the internet. And so APIs, well, knowing JSON was a prerequisite to understanding APIs so that you could understand why, like how they worked, right? And so APIs are incredibly important because there are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of applications that exist, and you want them to work together. And that's what APIs do. So you have, not only do you have computers, but you have apps on these computers and on these servers everywhere. And you want them to communicate with all these other apps, right? You want app 1 to communicate with app 2. You need app A to talk to app 2 as well. And so app 2 might be taking a lot of information from app 1 and app A and then showing that to you in a really cool way. I mean, there's a software called Tableau that its sole purpose is to take information from lots of different sources using its API and show it to you. That's all it does. And so sometimes that's all your app does. Other times it might be more complex than that. It might actually take that information and do some logistics on it, maybe push information back up. But if you remember when we were talking about apps, there's only four things that you can do with data. It's CRUD. And if you remember what CRUD is, you've got create, you can create information. And every single one of these, I bring this up because all of your application programming interfaces are going to be doing one of these four things. You can create information, you can read information, you can update, or you can delete. These are the four things all of your API endpoints, that's another new word, endpoints are going to do. So I'm going to get to the word endpoint in just a second here. When we talk about, I'm going to drag this all the way back up here to learning. We've already kind of dove into the learning side of things, but every API is going to be built up of three components. The first one is this URL, and the URL is the endpoint. You can kind of use these interchangeably. URL stands for Universal Resource Locator. And if we hop over to a website, the URL is this massive string, this massive thing of text up here on the top left, right? That's our URL. It's the Universal Resource Locator, meaning I can universally locate the thing I'm looking for and load it in. So API endpoints are going to be built of URLs. The second thing they're going to have is headers. Headers give context to the information that's coming in. For example, if you're looking to request information, right? Again, there's 4 things we can do. If you're looking to only read, we're going to be getting information. That's part of the header. If you're looking to create, update, delete, right? That's going to be part of the header. And these three over here are generally called just post. We're making a change in the database. And so all 3 of these are going to be part of the, just grouped under this idea of posting data, making a change to the database. So the headers incorporate all that. And then the last thing is data. You need to actually have the data that you're sending. And sometimes people call this the payload. Generally, this will be JSON. It can be something else. Rarely will it be something else. But data is the last piece of all of this. So we have our endpoint or URL. We have the headers that go along with it. And then we have the data that's actually coming in with the request to the application. So I want to show you an example of all of these, just kind of put together. And to do that, I'm going to be using my trusty app, Smart Suite, using the same thing I showed you in the previous video, except now we're going to take a look at the example request instead of the example response. So we know that the response is it's in JSON, and we reviewed that in the last video. But taking a look at this example request, you can ignore all of this at the beginning. We just want to take a look at, we've got this patch, kind of a weird one to use, but every single request, like I said, is going to have headers, data, and the URL. So we've got this URL. This is our universal resource locator for my specific app in Smart Suite. It's freaking awesome. Then we have 3 headers that come along with this, right? We've got authorization, we've got my account ID, we have my content type. So the content type provides the context of what kind of information should this endpoint be expecting in the payload, right? It's a little bit like if you got a dump truck coming in, it's like, all right, what kind of stuff are you dumping? Is it plastic? Is it chemical waste? Is it yada, 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 right? There's different things we're going to do depending on the type of data that's coming in. And then we have authorization. This header is incredibly important and will be required pretty much everywhere you go. Right? You are always going to need to authorize yourself. And then Smart Suite specific header here is my account ID. So all of this information is required for building your API request to request information from this particular endpoint and get it back in this structure. So I know I'm not diving super deep into this. That is somewhat intentional because we're already over 8 minutes and I don't want to get incredibly deep into this. I'm going to end by, I suppose, correcting myself on one account, and that is that there's actually a 4th piece of information that's going to come with all of these pieces, with every single URL, or I should say, request to an API, and that is, I think there's a more technical term for it, but it's just the type of request. And this will be something like get or post. And I was talking about this previously. I thought it was part of the headers, but looking at this, I realized that I'm mistaken. It wasn't part of the headers. So there's multiple, they'll call it like protocols in your API request that essentially determine what the API request can do inside the database. So a GET request, for example, cannot make any changes in the database. It's purely read. A POST or a PUT can modify information inside the database. Now, the only ones that I use are generally GET and POST. You can also do, looks like you can also do patch, but I've focused mainly on, and patch would be specifically for perhaps updating something within the database, but POST and GET are the 2 that I use most commonly. So that is an application programming interface. why it's important, so that your application can communicate with all the other applications out there, so that your front end can communicate with your back end, right? The APIs that you will create for your app or as part of your app are incredibly important. And the reason that all of these applications can communicate together is because they all have an application programming interface, an API set up to let you do that. So thanks so much for hopping in. The last thing to cover here is no-code tools. Each no-code tool has integrations. And integrations is another way of saying they've kind of put a wrapper over these APIs so that you don't have to deal with them directly. That's a really cool feature. It's a really cool thing to have because it lets you move faster, right? So these no-code tools that have integrations with these other applications let you skip the need to even know about the application programming interface, the API, and just jump straight into building. Great example of this is going to be Flutterflow and Firebase. Their integration is super tight to the point where you don't even need to worry about integrating Flutterflow into a backend that's using Firebase. It just happens automatically for you out of the box. And so each of these no-code tools is going to have different integrations and essentially let you work more effectively with these other tools. And as we've spoken previously, they'll kind of partner up and buddy up with tools that are in different buckets, in different responsibilities. So Flutterflow is partnered with Firebase because Firebase can handle the logic and the data side of things, and Flutterflow can render all of that information to the user. Smart Suite has opened up tons of integrations through Zapier, which is a very common logic platform. So looking at these no-code tools, you always want to determine, or when choosing your no-code stack, you'll want to determine which integrations are there so that you can build faster. And the integrations that exist will influence the softwares that you choose. Which is why I built the NoCode Software Selector to help you find the no-code tools and see which tools integrate best with others without needing to go out and do all that research yourself. So take a look at it in the link of the video below, and I'm excited to see what you build with no code. It's such a cool opportunity for us right now. And I promise that as you jump into it, it will open up the possibilities for you in a whole new way. Thanks so much for joining, and I will see you tomorrow.